You won't hear any criticism of Catholics, so if there's any Catholic watching this, sit down, take a breath, and relax, have your cup of coffee, because this is not a criticism of you. Maybe it's not even a criticism of your religion, even though I have many criticisms of Catholicism. However, what I want to analyze in this video are statements that are completely lacking in morality, completely full of ignorance on the part of the current Pope. To quote a Latin American president, I won't name names.
He is the representative of the evil one on earth.
Someone said that phrase, and I think it's fitting for this moment, because it was said in the context that the Pope is a close friend of all totalitarian regimes. That he is permissive with ideologies that, for example, are pro-communist, pro-human exploitation, in favor of limiting free thought, and so on and so on and so on. I agree with this, and that's exactly the criticism I'm going to make, because it fits with this. A new book is going to be released. That on the part of the Pope, since this is for the new year, the new jubilee of the Catholic Church, has been just another excuse to sell to poor parishioners. And the book is called Hope Never Disappoints. What will appear in the book is the following phrase. According to some experts, what is happening in Gaza has the characteristics of a genocide. We should investigate carefully to determine if it fits the technical definition formulated by jurists and international organizations. Sincerely, the representative of the evil one on earth, Jorge Mario Bergoglio, that is Pope Francis. Who are these experts? We will see how outrageous it can be to cite this, because according to the experts, there is no genocide in Gaza. According to the experts from that ideological camp that he so strongly supports, which is evil, totalitarianism, all those who oppose democracy, freedom, and the legitimate defense of a country against Islamic terror. According to the CIA World Factbook, the population of the Gaza Strip has grown by 2.2 since October 7. Explain to me in what genocide the population grows. It's the most failed genocide in the world. A genocide in which the population grows by 2%. You have to have a certain degree of stupidity, let's say. I don't want to say the person is stupid, but you have to have a certain degree of stupidity to claim that population growth is a genocide. Not being able to distinguish between a legitimate defensive war and a potential genocide. What was attempted to be done to us, and confusing that with a genocide. That is having moral blindness. Jorge Mario Bergoglio is wrong. Another stain on the Catholic Church. In its long history of anti-Semitism, of tying Jews' hands, of trying to denigrate Jews, Bergoglio enters the history books, and we Jews will remember him as yet another stain. And the world will remember him, because when the Catholic Church is gone, they will remember him as the Pope. That when Israel was being attacked on 7 fronts at the same time, defending itself, Israel using every possible method to avoid harming the civilian population. Evacuation routes, dropping humanitarian aid from the sky, from the sea, trucks from the land, humanitarian aid including medicine and food. Israel has provided more calories for people to eat in Gaza this year than what certain sectors of the population in Latin America consume. There is more hunger where Pope Bergoglio was born than in Gaza. What happens in Gaza is that Hamas steals certain supplies, and that's a separate issue. The country where we soldiers put our bodies on the line so that civilians can evacuate, risking our lives. That country is the one Bergoglio decided to call genocide. Nonsense. It's not the first time Pope Francis has made outrageous statements. In September, Bergoglio described the attacks in Lebanon as immoral and disproportionate. The attacks in Lebanon? Disproportionate? Israel, which carried out one of the largest intelligence operations in human history, being able to detonate pagers in the pockets of specifically the Hezbollah criminals. Specifically, I mean, never in history had there been an attack of such a large scale, because it was about 3,000 devices that were detonated, and they were specifically Hezbollah's, with them among the civilian population, specifically them. And you can see that this is immoral, specifically disproportionate. This is what Rabbi Dr. Warren Goldstein said. Rabbi Dr. Warren Goldstein, who is the chief rabbi of South Africa, also has a doctorate in law. That is, he really is an expert, unlike the Pope. The jurists, as Pope Bergoglio calls them, he really is a jurist. He really knows about these topics. And what did he say? Let me explain the context. South Africa tried to bring Israel before the International Court of Justice to accuse Israel of committing genocide. What's going on? In the end, the International Court of Justice didn't declare a genocide in South Africa's case. They only said genocide must be prevented, meaning it wasn't proven. South Africa embarrassed themselves. They spent millions of dollars they don't have to feed their own population just for a case against Israel. The chief rabbi of South Africa, Rabbi Goldstein, he also got involved. He addressed Pope Francis because Pope Francis, when he spoke about how immoral what Israel is doing and all this nonsense, Rabbi Goldstein said that Pope Francis is repeating the sins of Pius XIII. What are the sins of Pius XIII? Pius XIII was the Pope during the Holocaust. During the Holocaust, let me remind you, there was the largest extermination of Jews in history. And what did the Catholic Church do? They stayed silent. There were some righteous among the nations who were Catholics because their human ethics led them to save Jews, and they hid Jews in convents. But that was not the official stance of the Catholic Church. There have been investigations for over a decade now. Several documents have come out showing that Pope Pius XVII knew about the Holocaust and chose to remain silent. He didn't care. Why would he care that the Nazis were exterminating the people who, according to Catholic doctrine at that time, were considered the deicides, the ones who killed God and all that? He didn't care. So that's why Rabbi Goldstein said that what Frank is saying is repeating the sins of Pius XII, and that he is joining forces with evil. Which forces of evil? With Hamas, with Hezbollah, with the Islamofascist Republic of Iran. He also said that what Pope Bergoglio says is primitive pacifism. You know, we're talking about an expert. Rabbi Goldstein is an expert, and he explained it from the perspective of Augustine of Hippo. He showed what constitutes a just war, also under the Geneva Convention. That is, he used both international law and, let's say, Catholic philosophers themselves to show that Israel is fighting a just war. Something that Pope Bergoglio, I'm sure, didn't even look into at all. These statements from the Pope are another stain on the Catholic Church. In my opinion, Catholics should be ashamed that their representative is saying such outrageous things against the only democracy in the Middle East that we are fighting for. A war that is also on the verge of disappearing, not only with Catholicism, which is already over, with much of Middle Eastern Christianity. Obviously, Bergoglio turns a blind eye to this because I'm going to explain why. But I want to tell you about one of the many stains of the Catholic Church against the Jewish people as a collective. There was a thinker. This was in 1904. He was a Jewish thinker named Theodor Herzl. He was, you could say, the leading proponent of political Zionism, and he sought to promote the creation of a Jewish state. In 1904, he approached Pope Pius X. He approached Pius X and asked him for support to create a Jewish country. So that he, because the Catholic Church had a certain, unlike today the Catholic Church is in decline, and I think you have to be totally irrational to belong to the Catholic Church. But at that time, they had also lost quite a bit of relevance since the Napoleonic Wars and so on. It still had a certain prestige, even if only symbolic in Europe. Herzl asks the Pope for support. What does the Pope say to him? We can't approve this movement. That is to the Jewish national revival. We cannot prevent the Jews from going to Jerusalem, but we could never approve it. The soil of Jerusalem, if it was not always sacred, has been sanctified by the life of Jesus Christ. As the head of the church, I cannot say otherwise. The Jews have not recognized our Lord. Therefore, we cannot recognize the Jewish people. Gentlemen, this very doctrine was intentional. Then the Pope told him that if the Jews settled in Jerusalem, the Catholic Church would be willing to baptize the Jews. In other words, the Catholic Church has eternally persecuted the Jewish people. Bergoglio's doctrines, no matter how lax they sound and no matter how pro-LGBT they sound and no matter how left-wing and pro-abortion and all of this, he even told a comedian, it's okay to make fun of God, right? Saying that this is not the Noahide law. A prohibition in the Noahide laws is Giduf, which is cursing God. And one of the ramifications is making fun of God. The fact that the Pope told a comedian that it's okay to make fun of God. That violates the Noahide laws along with their existing idolatry. What's happening? As a doctrine, Catholicism was founded. Its great thinkers throughout the centuries were based on the idea that the Jewish people cannot have a country. You can read Christian thinkers who were fundamentally Catholic. All of them start from the idea that the Jewish people cannot have national independence again. Because we are eternally condemned to exile for being deicides. Deicides means having killed God, according to them. So that's basically the starting point for all of this. Then, in our time, in the 1960s, when they hold the Second Vatican Council, they start trying to reform these ideas. But, gentlemen, getting rid of the essence of 2000 years of history, or a little less, yes, 1700 years of history, isn't that simple? The Catholic Church still maintains this paradigm, let's say in its intellectual circles, that the existence of Israel is a theological difficulty for them. In fact, the Vatican is a country, but actually in the United Nations, it's a non-observer state. That's the category they have. There are two non-observer states, which are the Vatican and Palestine. They are two fictitious states. They're placebos that were given to certain groups so they would stop complaining. Because Palestine isn't a national entity and lacks territory, such a nation has never existed. They did the same with the Vatican. They invented an independence for them, gave them a nationality. Some borders. Borders, yes, in fact, Iceland has less territory than the Vatican. Do you know the Vatican, if you add up all the properties the Vatican owns around the world in land, in square meters, it's much bigger than Iceland. As a new country, the Vatican did not accept the creation of the State of Israel. They didn't recognize the State of Israel until something like 1991. That is, about half a century without accepting the creation of Israel, because Israel was reborn in 1948 and they did not accept it until then. You understand the big problem we have here? This is because the fact that we Jews were reborn in our land, that we returned to our land, undermines the foundations on which Christianity, as we know it today, was built. There were other branches of Christianity that became extinct, like the Ebionites and all those groups. But Christianity, as we know it today, starts from that point. And that's why it's not surprising that the Pope has to make statements against Israel. Second point, what is the Pope's closeness to all these totalitarian regimes? For example, someone here greeted us from Spain. Do you think, for example, that the President of Spain aligns himself with Catholic positions or not? What's going on? Those who applaud the Pope's worldview are people like Pedro Sanchez. They are people like the President of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, who have worldviews that are opposed to what Catholicism, let's say, professes. But they are the ones who applaud the Pope when he makes these kinds of statements. Please put two and two together. Why? What? If an institution, if a group like Hamas applauds the Pope's statements against Israel, if a president like Pedro Sanchez applauds the Pope's statements against Israel, if a president like Gustavo Petro does too, yes. A proto-communist, socialist, former or current guerrilla applauds the Pope's statements. Do you think the Pope is representing the religion you Catholics believe you practice? Or maybe this Pope is a problem for the institution itself. What is the huge problem that Catholicism, the religion, can't escape from? Why can't they escape it? It's called Papal Infallibility. So the Pope, all his statements according to the Church are guided by the Holy Spirit. So every Catholic has to buy into the story, has to force themselves to swallow that placebo that everything the Pope says, I have to accept it because he's the representative of, on earth.
The evil one's representative.
But because he represents the Catholic Church, like me, from my Catholic perspective, I have to buy into everything Bergoglio says. Do you think that's right? Because the Pope has remained silent about the systematic elimination of 85% of Christians in the Middle East. Iran, for example, a totally totalitarian regime that denigrates human rights, denigrates women's rights, denigrates religious rights, like his. Why doesn't he speak out against it? Why does Pope Bergoglio call this guy, Mahmoud Abbas, the leader of Fatah of the Palestinian Authority, an angel of peace? Did you know that? That in 2015 the Pope called Mahmoud Abbas an angel of peace. Mahmoud Abbas, the same one who gives salaries to terrorists in prisons. That is, if there is an Arab who attacks a Jew in Israel or anywhere else, attacks him and tries to harm him, and he gets arrested. The Palestinian Authority, this guy, Mahmoud Abbas, pays a salary to the terrorist in prison and to his family. And those salaries that Palestinian terrorists earn in prison are higher than what, for example, school teachers earn. That is, if an Arab has to choose between being a school teacher or committing a terrorist attack, getting sent to prison, living like a king, getting paid a salary, then what do I choose? Why would I want to be a teacher? If I get free food and all that in prison anyway, I'm going to explain to you why, in my opinion, the Pope says nonsense like this. First, because Catholicism is a religion that is losing relevance. For the past 200 years, it's been declining. Catholicism is going to end. The fact that there are still many Catholics, 1 out of every 3 people is Christian, and the majority, more than 50%, are Catholic, this is the legacy of 2,000 years of Western imposition on the world. If you are in Latin America, right? You are the heirs of those impositions. Your ancestors from about 500 years ago, over that 300-year span and after, were given this option: be Catholic, or you're not a human being, you're not part of humanity. There are those who try to say, look, it's written in the will of Queen Isabel the Catholic that the rights of the Indians should be respected when they accept Catholicism. If they reject Catholicism, they lose these rights and are not human. This is why you inherited lies from your fathers, in the words of the prophet Jeremiah. What's happening? Catholicism is declining, that's a fact. There are many studies about this, and maybe I'll dedicate a video to this topic to show you the statistical data. In Europe, it's a lost cause. Europe is already moving towards secularism, and Latin America has already started this process because Latin America is mostly influenced by the United States. And since in the United States, progressive movements and all of that have an impact, especially nowadays with globalization, in Latin America, secularism is advancing much faster. What's happening? The churches, especially the huge cathedrals that a lot of the parishioners' money was spent on building, are getting emptier every day. People don't want to hear about religion. They're tired of some guy dressed up with a bunch of ornaments and a staff coming in and starting to talk to them about hell. And a lot of people don't want this. People watch YouTube and listen to other viewpoints. People don't want religion. They're tired. That's a fact. It's a phenomenon. In the world, all religions, including Islam and Judaism, have some form of secularism. What's happening? In order to stay relevant, the Pope has to say things that keep him relevant. If the direction of the world, for example, when he looks at Western society, the one in Europe, he sees these trends in the West. These young people who are drawn to more progressive ideas as well as gender ideologies. So, the Pope has to make a statement saying something attention-grabbing in order to stay relevant. That's why if the Pope is asked about the most, I dare say, media-covered conflict of recent years, it's Israel's war. Such a small conflict. If you look at the conflicts in the world, do you know what's happening in countries like, for example, Sudan right now? You don't understand the astronomical numbers. Do you know what's happening in Yemen? In Afghanistan, in Iraq, about 3 weeks ago, they started the process of legalizing marriage to minors, to girls. That is, 60-year-old men can marry girls, just like Muhammad did, who married a 6-year-old girl. This is the phenomenon that, of course, the Pope isn't interested in, and to stay relevant, he has to say something completely senseless about this minor conflict. Why? Because this minor conflict makes a lot of noise in the world. Because it's a conflict that, even though it's small, and I explained this in another video, it's small in quantity, but great in significance. Because the soul of people, of humanity, feels that something important is happening here. The war of civilizations is happening here. The future of humanity is this war, gentlemen. I know it doesn't seem like it, but this is a coalition of values. It's not what's happening, for example, in Lebanon, where there is a civil war, and there is, to some extent, or in Syria, or in Libya. Right now there's a civil war in Libya, for example, or in Yemen. It's an internal war that affects certain worldviews, which is Islam against Islam, but Israel's war is a clash of worldviews for the whole world. Perhaps the distant East isn't directly affected, though economically it is, since countries like China feel geopolitical impacts. But here in Israel, we're experiencing this conflict. That's why the Pope has to say stupid things to stay relevant in this whole debate. And since he can disconnect himself from the, how do you say it, the 2000-year Catholic narrative that says Jews can't have national relevance, another aspect is that Israel represents human freedom. We represent freedom of thought. We represent the, how do you say it, rebellion against totalitarianism. Do you know which country managed to decolonize its land? After 2000 years, we are the Jews. The Jews, who are the natives of this land, managed to decolonize our land. The only people who, after 2000 years, still speak the same language, keep the same traditions in the same land, are the Jews. What does the Catholic Church profess, historically speaking? The opposite. Totalitarianism, where there is no free thought, but rather the intellect is reduced to a small circle of intellectuals locked away somewhere in monasteries. And that science is only for them and knowledge is only for them, and let the people rot. And in modernity, when modern man awoke and began to displace theocentrism, that is, the idea that everything revolves around this concept of God that they created, and they displaced it. To humanism, for example, that human beings are the ones around whom all reality and values should revolve. That's when the Catholic Church began to collapse. Then with Napoleon, all of this happened, the Catholic Church began to fall apart, and what did the Western world do so that the Catholic Church still remains as a symbol? They gave them a small symbolic piece inside Rome so they could stay there, that placebo they were given. There's no way Catholicism will come out of this. I mean, it's not going to be reborn. I can assure you of that because we've already seen it in Europe and we're already seeing it in Latin America. And that's why, to stay relevant, he has to say things like that. I must say that the Pope, at least, met with some of the, how do you say it, families of the hostages in Gaza. For example, he met with the mother of Hirsch Goldberg Pauling, may his memory be blessed, who was executed in Gaza. Even the Pope mentioned him in a speech, saying that Hirsch is in his thoughts. Just in passing. After the Pope met with the families of the kidnapped Israelis, who were abducted on October 7, he went and met with the families of the convicts in Gaza, who are in prisons. People Israel arrested for terrorist acts. And he went and met with the families, to stay lukewarm. To say, well, I meet with the families, but so they don't say I'm too pro-Israel, I'm also going to meet with the families of the convicts in prisons. That's the level. That's the Pope. This primitive pacifism, as Raphael Goldberg used to say, is it possible to create a peace agreement between the Jewish nation of Israel and the Christian community of the Holy Roman Catholic Apostolic Church? The criticism here is against the statements of a guy imagining he was given the power to grab a microphone and say whatever stupid thing he wants. That's different from what people think. The average Catholic in general agrees with the measures that Israel takes against Islamic radicalism. I know this because people write to me constantly. Even Catholics say we must fight radicalism. There's no other option. And yes, we feel sorry about the war, but there's no other way out, especially in countries like Spain, by the way. In countries like Spain, unlike Latin America. In Latin America, they're not as aware of, for example, the social and security challenges that the advance of Islamic radicalism brings to society. In Spain, they know it because they're experiencing it. They experience wave after wave of migrants who are literally criminals, people indoctrinated with religious extremism. That's why many Spaniards are supportive. They agree with Israel's measures. But they had the misfortune of getting a pope who supports progressive things he doesn't even understand, topics that, so these Catholics who want to support Israel ended up with a pope who says all kinds of nonsense. So that's why, yes, and that's it. B'Shvat Hashem, that is, with the help of God, the God of Israel, may we see days of peace in Israel, in every corner of the world, in the corners of the world where this Pope remains silent, when there is no peace. But of course, when it's Israel taking a stand, B'Shvat Hashem, may there also be peace here, so that he doesn't even have the chance to speak badly about Israel, as he has been boasting. And if you are Catholic, here watching this video, let me remind you, this video was not a criticism against you. It's obvious that from my position, I have criticisms of Catholicism as an ideology, just as I have criticisms of Nazism, communism, and ultra-feminism. I also have criticisms of Catholicism for them in the same way. So, the criticism isn't against you, Catholic parishioner, because I know that if there's someone here who is Catholic and has their feet on the ground and knows the facts and has seen the development of this war and has seen the demonization that has been done to Israel and has seen how the dynamics of this whole conflict work, knows that the Pope's statements are simply disconnected from what is really happening on the ground, that is de facto. And that's why I appreciate you, as Catholics, for speaking out, so that we may see days of peace, and all the best to everyone. God willing, thanks to everyone who joined this live stream, sending my regards.